Hello everyone, welcome to back my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before starting the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The plane was 35,000 feet over the Atlantic when Rishi Sunak finally snapped. The breaking point was a question from the Financial Times about why the British Prime Minister thought a mid-sized country might be in a position to write the global rules for artificial intelligence. There was a flash of anger in his eyes. "That mid-sized country you talked about," Sunak began, before proceeding to extol Britain's position as a global leader in technology. Sunak's frustration had been building for months. Behind the scenes, he railed to friends and colleagues about journalists talking down Britain. Why, he wondered, could they not be more proud of their own country, like French reporters? But nobody on that trip to Washington in June had ever seen him quite like this before, the cool technocrat stirring for a fight. Sunak will need plenty of spark in the months ahead, as he strives to make British voters and the rest of the world see the UK as he does. The obvious problem is that Britain became an international joke in recent times, in large part thanks to his own Conservative Party, which burnt through 5 prime ministers in 6 years. When The Economist ran a cover story last year headlined "Welcome to Britaly," there was a furious reaction to the comparison in Italy. Sunak is still hurt by the mocking memes sent to him by high-rolling colleagues in his old world of international finance before he became Prime Minister in October 2022. Some compared the shelf life of his predecessor, Liz Truss, to a head of lettuce. "He's proud of Britain. He wants people to have pride in their country," says an aide speaking, like some other Sunak supporters, on condition of anonymity. He feels that very strongly. Next year, Sunak will ask the public at a general election to press the Tories with another 5 years in power. Even many in his own party believe he is doomed to fail, that he will be dragged under by the legacy of 13 years of Conservative rule. Public sector austerity, Brexit, the chaos and lies of Boris Johnson, the COVID-19 lockdown parties, and the economic meltdown of Truss's brief tenure. This month alone, the PM's efforts to talk about the future, a pact with the EU on scientific collaboration, or the prospects for a UK-India trade deal, have been drowned out by events that seem to epitomize an administration decaying in office. Schools have been closed to stop crumbling concrete roofs falling on students' heads. Holidays were wrecked when the country's air traffic control system collapsed and a prisoner charged with terrorism escaped strapped to the underside of a truck from an understaffed jail. The scale of the country's problems would seem almost comedic if they weren't so grim. The price for this cavalcade of mismanagement can be seen in public opinion surveys, which typically show the Tories trailing Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party by between 15 and 20 points, easily enough to overturn the 80-seat majority won by Boris Johnson in 2019. Anthony Wells, director of political polling at YouGov, says he had not seen a government so exhausted since John Major's Conservative administration in the 1990s. Asked for his views for a 4,000-word piece on whether Sunak could win the next election, he replied, "What are you going to say in the other 3,999? Nonetheless, Sunak remains bullish about his chances of defying the skeptics, with the economy faring better and inflation coming under control. A revamped Number 10 operation is determined to deliver a 5th consecutive Tory election victory. He really believes he can do it," says one Downing Street insider. But with such a narrow path to victory, the challenge will be avoiding falling off. Sunak became Britain's Prime Minister with a simple mission: to sort out the mess left behind by Johnson, who left office last September in a sea of scandal, and his successor Truss, whose surreal 49 days in power made her the shortest-serving PM in British history. Nobody had a clear idea of what exactly Sunak wanted to do with the country. He made an unusual decision when he became party leader and prime minister not to set out his stall, says Paul Goodman, editor of the Conservative Home website, a Bible for the party's grassroots. According to Goodman, Sunak had taken the advice of Isaac Levito, the party's Australian election strategist. Isaac said that after Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, the voters didn't want to hear from the Tories and he should concentrate on delivering a pragmatic Sunak, with his elite education, Winchester College, Oxford University, Stanford, and career in finance at Goldman Sachs, would deploy his analytical skills to crack the big issues facing the country. His advisors badged him as Rishi the problem solver. So in January, Sunak set out 5 priorities for his government, with mixed results. His 3 economic promises to have inflation cut debt, and grow the economy appeared achievable at the time and look likely to be met. But the pledge to cut England's hospital waiting lists has not been delivered. The number waiting for treatment has risen from 7.2 million when he first made the promise to a record 7.6 million. Meanwhile, there has been little progress on his bold promise to stop the boats carrying migrants across the English Channel. A plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is held up in the courts. Sunak remains focused on immediate problems. Rishi says we don't have the space at the moment to talk about future stuff, says one ally. The party is gripped with a fear of impending electoral oblivion. Tory MPs and ministers returned to Westminster this month in a grumpy mood, an air of political suffocation compounded by the stultifying late summer heat building up in the Victorian corridors. There was no relief from the polls, which showed Labour apparently heading for a first election victory since 2005. What we need now is a general on horseback, says one former cabinet minister. Rishi hasn't been that general so far. Sunak's narrow path to victory in a general election was first described by his strategist Levido at the start of this year. It was an optimistic scenario in which the economy picks up, hospital waiting lists fall, clandestine migration sharply declines, and disciplined Tory MPs fall in behind the Prime Minister and his new vision. The pessimistic scenario, viewed as much more likely by bookmakers and some Tories, sees the Prime Minister struggling to throw off the legacy of the past, while his party enters a death spiral of ill discipline and recrimination. According to one former minister, if Sunak showed the energy and boldness he showed in the Treasury, it's possible we could still win the next election. But he's timid and lethargic. Sunak has fallen a long way since the heights of popularity he enjoyed in 2020 when, as the newly minted COVID Chancellor, he dispensed billions of pounds to see the country through the pandemic, making him the most popular holder of that post in 40 years. Then it would have been scarcely imaginable that he could lose to Truss in a Tory leadership contest as he did last year. Indeed, when he was asked in a Sky television interview this May how it felt to lose, the Prime Minister was left speechless, apparently unable to process the experience. He was traumatized, says one Tory MP. Since succeeding the self-destructing Truss last October, Sunak's brand of managerial competence also appears to have lost some of its appeal. Speaking of the disquiet that has been seeping out in Westminster WhatsApp groups throughout the summer, one right-wing Tory MP says, Rishi hasn't got it in him to win this election. He's a manager, not a leader. He's an investment banker, not a politician. Sunak has promised Tory MPs he will map out his vision for the country's future at the party conference in October and in the King's speech the following month. Clues to this vision, say his team, are to be found in the text of two speeches, his priority-setting speech at London's Olympic Park in January and the May lecture he gave to City of London folk in 2022 when he was still Chancellor. It is safe to say that neither of these texts has entered the nation's consciousness. To the extent that a political creed of Sunakism can be discerned, his allies say he is most passionate about creating a world-class education system and harnessing the power of technology to boost the country's sluggish growth rate. Sunak, who spent his 20s hanging out with tech pros, he still has a home in Santa Monica, seems to want to build Britain in his own image. I studied and worked in California, surrounded by Silicon Valley startups, living and breathing that entrepreneurial culture, Sunak said in his May lecture. His January speech promised to reimagine our approach to numeracy and the hiring of more maths teachers. Both speeches dwelled on the case for boosting R&D and innovation. Many economists agree with his analysis.